take a look at the nun's priest's tale, and this is an interesting part of the story. If you ever read Canterbury Tales, they're on the way to Canterbury, and someone has just told a tragic tale, and the knight doesn't like that. And things are looking kind of like people are getting irritated about the storytelling, and the host is afraid, oh no, it's going to end. But then he spots the priest that was along with the nun. And this is a little confusing because both nuns and priests, if you look at the title, have an apostrophe. So it means the priest belongs to the nun and the tale belongs to the priest. The nun's priest's tale, and that's why it's worded that way. So we have this tale that's told by the priest of the nun, and he begins by telling of a woman who was a farmer and lived a long time ago. And I'm going to read it, but I want you to follow along. I'm going to read it with some interpretation as I go. In other words, I'm not going to read it exactly as it's written, but I will kind of make it a little easier to understand. So let's just look at the first part of this. Once long ago, there dwelt a poor old widow in a small cottage by a little meadow beside a grove and standing in a dale. Well, you can understand that. This widow woman, of whom I tell my tale, since the sad day when she was last a wife, or since she lost her husband, who had led a very patient, simple life, she had little capital to pay her rent, so she's poor. But still, by making do with what God sent, she kept herself and her 2 daughters going. 3 hefty sows, no more, and 3 cows as well, and a sheep called Molly were all she had. Sooty her hall, her kitchen melancholy. What does it mean, sooty her hall? Sooty, what's soot?
Oh, dirt.
Like dust.
What does soot usually come from?
The river.
A fire. Comes from a fire. So in these times, how many of you have a real fireplace in your house where you build? You know how it will start to get black right above where the fire is and you have to clean it up? The soot from the fire is minimal in our homes today because we have we're not using them to heat our homes, but back then when they had to build a big fire in an open hearth and heat their home, this soot would come in and turn the walls black. And it says, sooty her hall, her kitchen was melancholy. What's melancholy? Yeah, her kitchen was just, plain. And there she ate many a slender meal. There was no sauce piquant to spice her veal, no dainty morsel ever passed her throat. And here's a saying I really like. According to her cloth, she cut her coat. What do you think that means? According to her cloth, she cut her coat.
She made the cloth herself.
Well, no. Everybody tended to make their own clothes. At least a poor person couldn't go out. She was going to make a coat, but how did she decide to make this coat? According to her cloth. What do you think that means?
Out of the curtain.
How much she had. However much she had, that's what she would use to make her coat. So she had to cut the pattern to fit whatever skimpy amount of material she had. But it means also, it has another meaning. It means that she lived within her means. She used what she had. She didn't go out and say, oh, there's not enough cloth here for the coat I want. I'll borrow some money from my neighbor and go buy more material. No, it says, according to her cloth, she cut her coat. She lived within her means. And this is a saying I've said at home. And it's part of our family lore to say when we're trying to decide whether we should get something, if we have to get it on credit, I'll say, let's cut our coat according to our cloth. In other words, let's not use credit. And so it just barely means that cutting your coat according to your cloth means you're staying within your means. Repletion never left her in disquiet. And it tells you down here that repletion means you ate too much. So she never had an upset stomach from eating too much, and she had a temperate diet. She had hard work for exercise, and her heart was content. She never had the gout that rich people got. Do you know what gout was caused by?
Rich food.
Rich food, lots of meat, fat. That would cause gout, very painful condition. Have you ever known anyone who's had it? I saw a man with gout once, and his big toe was like this big. It was so, it was so gross, and he couldn't walk, and it was very painful. And so she never had apoplexy. She didn't have the problem with a stroke because she ate so carefully. She didn't have wine. Her board or her meal was mostly served with white and black, milk and brown bread, in which she found no lack. Broiled bacon or an egg or two were common, because she had what? Did she have a hen? Yeah, she had several. We're going to find out. She had a yard that was enclosed about by a stockade with a dry ditch around the outside, in which she kept a cock called Chaucer. So here's a rooster named Chaucer, and he's the star of our story, Chaucer. In all the land for crowing, he had no peer. He was the best crower in the land. His voice was more jolly than an organ playing on church and Sundays, and he was great at it. Far, far more regular than any clock or abbey bell. He would always crow on the hour. The equinoctial wheel and its position, so it's just making fun. It's saying that whatever time it was, he was precise. And it tells you down here, Chaucer and his contemporaries accounted for changes in the position of the stars and planets by imagining the heavens encircled the earth once a day, moving 15 degrees each hour. That's what they believed. And they believed there was this imaginary wheel surrounding the equator, and they were just turning with that. So anyway, so he was precise. He knew every hour the 15 degrees of movement, and he would crow so perfectly. Now listen to the description of this guy, because we're going to think a little bit about it later, but you tell me what you think of this description. His comb was redder than fine coral, tall and battlemented like a castle wall. His bill was black and shiny as jet. Like azure blue were his legs, and they were set with nails of lily white. Now there are roosters of these colorations. Like burnished gold, his feathers flaming bright. This gentle cock was master in some measure of 7 hens, all there to do his pleasure. They were his sisters and his paramours, colored like him in all particulars. So, how do you think this guy looks? He's colorful. What else? Is he ugly?
No.
No, he's a handsome rooster. And his red stands up on his head like a castle wall, and you can just see him strutting as roosters do. Have you ever seen a rooster strut? I've seen some guys strut like that before. No, but they just really strut their stuff. Now, she, with the loveliest dyes upon her throat, was known as Gracious Lady Brit.Lit. Courteous was she, discreet and debonair, companionable too, and took such care in her deportment since the day she'd been 7 days old. She held the heart of Chaucer controlled, locked up securely in her every limb. Oh, such happiness, his love to him. And such a joy it was to hear them sing, as when the glorious sun began to spring in the sweet accord, my love is far from the land. They would sing this song together. For in those far-off days, I understand, all birds and animals could speak and sing. Now it befell, as dawn began to spring, when Chaucer and Brit.Lit and all his wives were perched in this poor widow's hall, fair Brit.Lit was next to him on the perch, and Chaucer began to groan and lurch, and like something sorely troubled him in a dream. So he's asleep, and he gets all restless. And he wakes up, Brit.Lit heard him roar, and says, oh, dearest heart, what's ailing you? Why do you groan so? Fie, what a sleeper, what a noise to make. Madam, he said, I beg you not to take offense, but by the Lord, I had a dream so terrible just now that I had to scream. I still can feel my heart racing from fear. Have you ever woken up from a nightmare like that? Just aside, have you woken up from a bad dream and you can feel your heart? I have. How many have had that happen? Really bad nightmare, and you can't go back to sleep, and you're like, oh, that's just so terrible. So he's in this condition. God turned my dream to good, he says, and guard all here. I dreamt that roaming up and down in our yard, I saw a kind of beast. And it was like a hound, but not exactly, and it tried to grab me and kill me. His color was a blend of yellow and red, so he's kind of an orangish rust color. His ears and tail were tipped with sable fur, unlike the rest, so dark tip, and he was a russet cur. Small was his snout, and his eyes were glowing bright. It was enough to make one die of fright, and was no doubt what made me groan and swoon. What did he describe? What kind of animal do you think would be kind of rust-colored, black feet, black tip on the tail, tiny nose,
Fox.
bright eyes, yes, a fox. Okay, for shame, she said, you timorous poltroon. So she's calling him a coward. And she goes on to say, you've fortified my heart and lost my love. I cannot love a coward, come what may, for certainly, whatever we may say, all women long, oh, that it might be, for husbands tough, dependable, and free. So she's making fun of him because she thinks he's being a wimp, and she doesn't like wimps, she says. And then she says, how dare you say for shame and to your love that anything at all was to be feared? Okay, so we're looking at the mentality of the Middle Ages. What was the mentality that men had to display when we talked about how men were in the mead hall all the time and their buddies were their best friends? They had some fair lady they fought for, but what was their code of ethics? How did they always have to appear? Fearful?
A manly man.
A manly man, brave, not afraid of anything. And they want, she's saying, that's the kind of man I want. Now, this is ridiculous in reality, right? Every human being gets afraid when it's necessary to be afraid. And so, but she's saying, this is typical of that time period. I want a brave man, and if you show fear, you've lost my heart. Okay, what a fickle girl, right? Dreams are vanity, God knows, pure error, she says. And she said, you know what? You're just having vapors in the belly. You have gas pains, which compete with others and swollen tight. No doubt the redness in your dream tonight comes from the red color in your blood. And she starts making all these excuses. She says that he just ate something bad. He has vapors in his stomach. She says, just so the black and melancholy vapors will set a sleeper shrieking and cutting capers and swearing that black bears, black bulls as well, are black as fiends. So she's saying if your problem is with the humor of blood, sanguine. Remember they believed in the four humors? We've talked about it before. Sanguine, melancholy, phlegmatic, and choleric. She says, so if your dream is because you upset your red humor, because sanguine is red, then that's why you dreamed about a red fox. And she's explaining if your dream is because your, which humor is it that's black? She said, oh, melancholy. She says, then you're going to dream about black bears and stuff. So she has this all figured out, right? And then what I don't want you to freak over is right now, starting with Cato. And Cato was a Greek that was a famous orator. And starting right now with Cato and going all the way to, let's say, well, there's a story on the next page that's really good, but there are going to be little periods where they start arguing using the names of great philosophers and great people. And they will start going back and forth. Well, Cato says, and what about this story of so-and-so? And you're going to go, who in the heck are all these people? Now, if you'd like, you can look them up. In fact, I think I made a list online I can print for you of who all these people are. But basically, this is really kind of funny because here's these two chickens. I mean, it's a rooster and a chicken. And they're having philosophical arguments about, you know, whether dreams mean anything or not. That's what they're arguing about. And they're bringing in all these scholars and famous people in the Bible, and they're arguing on and on about this. And in a way, it's kind of making fun of something. We're going to look at that a little bit later. But Cato goes down, if you turn the page and go down to line 160, there is a story here of a murder that goes here in the next page, and I really do want you to read this story. We have time. Would you like me to start it with you?
Yes.
Okay. Right. Don't let me forget, we have to collect the notebooks. If someone wants to do that right now, I'm afraid I'll get carried away and forget. Okay, so I'm going to read to you this story. This is kind of an interesting story. I actually like this story. So he's telling about this story of murder. He says, people, okay. One of the greatest authors, I'm starting on line 164. One of the greatest authors one can read says, this tells this story. There were two pals, two comrades on a pilgrimage. And they reached a town, and it was so full of people on this pilgrimage, they couldn't find any place to stay. And so they had to separate. One actually got a room, and the other one was put in a barn of some kind. It says, the first of them found refuge in a stall down in the yard with the oxen and the plow. And his friend found lodging for himself somewhere else, by accident or destiny, which governs all of us equally, he says. Now it so happened, long ere it was day, this fellow had a dream. Now the fellow that's in the lodging has this dream. And he heard his comrade say, help, help, I'm lying in an ox's stall and shall tonight be murdered as I lie. Help me, dear brother, help, help, or I shall die. Come in haste. Such were the words he heard from his friend in his dream. And then he woke up with terror. But once awake, he said, oh, it was just a dream. And he paid no attention, as many of us would. And he dismissed it as his own invention of his mind and a fantasy. But twice he dreamed this dream in a row. Yet a third time his comrade came again to him in a dream and said, I have been slain. Look, look, my wounds are bleeding wide and deep. Rise early in the morning, break your sleep, and go to the west gate. You there shall see a cart all loaded up with dung, said he, and in that dung my body has been hidden. Boldly arrest that cart as you are bidden. It was my money that they killed me for. So he comes to his comrade the third time in a dream. He says, too late, I'm dead. They stabbed me, and you know what? They buried me in this cart of, what's dung? Yeah, ugh, animal waste. They buried me in this. We could use a really bad word here. And he told him every detail, sighing and pitiful, telling what happened. And then the rooster says, this dream, believe me, madam, turned out true. For in the dawn, as soon as it was light, he went to where his friend has said, and he came upon the cattle stall, and he looked about him and began to call. The innkeeper, appearing, came quickly and answered, Sir, your friend has gone. He left town a little after dawn. The man began to feel suspicious. Drawn by memories of his dream, he went to the western gate. There was the dung cart, and what do you suppose? There he found some on the ground, a dung cart loaded on the very plan described by the murdered man. So he began to shout courageously for right and vengeance on the felony. My friend's been killed. There's been a foul attack. He's in the cart and gapping on his back. Fetch the authorities. Get the sheriff. And guess what? He was right. This is the rooster now. What need I add to finish off the story? So what you see here, with all these people they're referring to and all the stuff they're calling on, is they're arguing about, do dreams mean anything or do they not mean anything? So how many of you think dreams have meaning? Have you ever had a horrible nightmare? Like one time my daughter called me from college at 2 in the morning and said, are you okay? I said, yeah, I'm fine. She said, I just had a horrible dream that something happened to you. Well, nothing had happened to me, but it scared her so bad she had to call home. And so what do you think? Do dreams have meaning, yes or no? Do you think, how many think they have meaning? Okay, we have a good group here that thinks they have meaning. How many think they don't mean a thing? Okay, how many think both?
Well, I
Yeah.
was just going to say that most dreams probably don't have any meaning, but there are a couple of those dreams that do have some meaning, so...
Yes, and
Okay.
people will say that I've talked to that when they woke up, they knew that this dream meant something. And other times they said, usually when I wake up I think, oh, if they remember their dreams, that was so crazy, and they can kind of see how it was an accumulation of their day's events coming together in some fantastical way, and it's really, yeah, you're laughing because that's happened, right? And you go, oh, this is hilarious. But they believe that sometimes dreams do mean something. Well, they're arguing about this, and he tells the story of this man being murdered to prove his point. And listen to this. I want you to turn to line 230. It's on page 126, line 230. Oh, blessed God, that art so just and true. Thus thou revilest murder, as we say. Murder will out. Heard that before?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. We see it day by day. Murder's a foul, abominable treason, so loathsome to God's justice, to God's reason, he will not suffer its concealment. True, things may lie hidden for a year or two, but still, murder will out, that's my conclusion. Okay, so this is how the rooster thinks. Now we have them still arguing. They're in confusion, and now we're going to hear another dream story. By this we see that dreams are to be dreaded. This is line 243. By this we see that dreams are to be dreaded, and the self-same book I find embedded. Here's another story. Right in the very chapter after this last story I told you, I'm not inventing this, I hope for bliss. The story of two men who started out to cross the sea, for merchandise no doubt, but as the winds were contrary, they waited. It was a pleasant town, I should have stated, and it was by the port, and a few days later with the evening tide, the wind veered to the direction they wanted to go. They were delighted, and they went to rest, meaning to sail the next morning. Well, one of them, a miracle befell. This man, as he lay sleeping, it would seem, just before dawn, had an astounding dream. He thought a man was standing by his bed, commanding him to wait, and thus he said, "If you set sail tomorrow as you intend, you will be drowned. My tale's at an end." He woke and told his friend what had occurred and begged him not to go on the journey, but to stay behind with him so that he wouldn't drown. But his companion laughed at him and said, "Oh, it's just a dream. I'm not afraid of any vision." And guess what happened? Well, a straw for all your dreamings. And then he says, "Your dreams are worthless, just empty nonsense. Why, people dream all day of owls and apes, all sorts of trash that can't be understood. And it never happens." So he says, "You stay behind, I'm going." And yet, before they'd covered half the trip, I don't know what went wrong. There was a rip, and by some accident, the ship went down to the very bottom, and all hands drowned. In sight of the vessel at her side, they had put on upon the selfsame tide. "So," says the rooster, "my dear Brit.Lit, if you discern the force of these examples, you may learn one never should be careless about dreams." So then he goes on again, and I want you to not panic about this. You're not accountable for these sections where they have these intellectual arguments, even though I find them delightfully fun. I don't want to lose you here. So the next thing that you want to look at is line 307, and if you want to put a little bracket there from 307 to the bottom is his biblical dream, and he's talking about the story of Daniel. You know that story where Daniel has a dream? It says, or how about Joseph? And you will see that many dreams come true. What was Joseph's dream?
Coat of many colors.
No, it was the cattle
Oh, the
and
cattle.
hay.
Yeah, okay. There were 7 fat cows, then 7 skinny cows, and it was being foretold to him that there was going to be a famine, and he prepared for it. And what about Pharaoh? With the look at what befell his butler and his cook, what was that story?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and so it was in a dream that Joseph got this message, and so he's telling of all these biblical dreams that came true. And then on the next page, he goes on to some Croesus, Andromache, Hector, which of course is from, Hector is in the story, the Iliad, Achilles also, and he's citing all these people and how they're being foretold of their disaster. So Chaucer says, in line 332, "My dream undoubtedly foretells confusion. It bodes me ill, and I say, and furthermore, upon your laxatives I set no store." I skipped the part where Brit.Lit said, "You just need a laxative. You got indigestion or something." You know, she's arguing with him. She says, "Take a purge," right? And he says, "I set no store, for they are venomous. I've suffered by them often enough before, and I defy them." And now let's talk of fun and stop all this, dear madam, as I hope for heaven's bliss. Of one thing God has sent me plenteous grace, when I see the beauty of your face. And then, I love this part, he goes on and he flatters her. "The scarlet loveliness about your eyes, all thought of terror and confusion dies. I'm now brave again because I saw you. For it's as certain as the creed I know, mulier e hominis confusio." And then he says, a Latin tag, dear madam, which means, "Woman is man's delight and all his bliss." But look at the bottom and see what the Latin phrase really means. What does it mean? Woman is man's ruin. So he's flattering her. He tells her this phrase, woman is man's ruin, but he gives her the interpretation that she's wonderful. So he goes on flattering her to pieces, and he says, I defy all visions and dreams. I'm brave now. And then he goes out, he flies down from the beams, he gets ready to crow, and he has all this macho confidence, and he's domineering, and you can read that all the way down to the bottom of the page. It says, royal he was afraid no more. He feathered Brit.Lit in a wanton way, and trod her 20 times there the prime of day. Grim as a lion was his manly frown. As on his toes he sauntered up and down, strutting around. He scarcely deigned to set his foot on the ground, and every time a seed of corn was found, he gave a chuck, and up his wifes ran all. Thus, as a royal prince who strides his hall, Brit.Lit is Chaucer engaged on feeding, and passed the avenger that was breeding. Okay, so now the story is going on, and it's telling about where the signs are, and let's see, fate, providence, boulevards. Okay, let's go down to line 386. But in that moment, fate let fly her shaft. Okay, so fate intervenes right now, and the latter end of joy is woe. So they're all happy, he's strutting around, but now some woe is coming. God knows that worldly joy is swift to go. What is this deal here with them saying in one line, fate let fly her shaft, like fate was in control, and then in line 3, God knows, and they talk about God. What's the deal here? Who can tell me? How are God and fate in the same verse? Alice.
It was in the period that, like, the Christianity phase was first got created.
Right. It was in the period where, and he's also telling the story as if it's even more in the past. It's during the period when the pagans are accepting Christianity and trying to blend it with their own beliefs. Remember when we read The Seafarer and the Wanderer, how we go back and forth between fate and God, because they hadn't quite integrated the Christian religion yet, or they did it by mixing it with their own beliefs. So here he talks about fate. God knows that worldly joy is swift to go, and a good speaker with a flair for style could chronicle this maxim in his file, the saying that joy is swift to go. So down here, he's babbling on again. He talks about Sir Lancelot, who held all women in high esteem, and then he talks on, and then in line 397, here's where it starts to get interesting. Okay, how many of you are on line 397? Okay, let's see what happens now. We've got our handsome rooster strutting around. All he has to do is chuck, and his 7 hens run to him, and he's just so spoiled, and he thinks he's such hot stuff. Now, a cold-tipped fox of sly iniquity that had been lurking round the grove for 3 long years, that very night burst through and passed the stockade and hedge as Providence forecast. Now, Providence is God, usually. So now we're saying Providence instead of fate. Into the yard where Chaucer the fair was likely to be with his ladies, still in a bed of cabbages he lay until about the middle of day. So here's this fox in the cabbages laying very still, watching. Now, I can just see his eyes twinkling. He's laying down and he's thinking, ooh, dinner. This looks really good. There's 7 of them. He's all excited. But there's a fence between him and dinner, so he's got to come up with something here. Watching the rooster and waiting for his cue, as all these homicides gladly do, as murderers do. They lie in wait and they watch carefully. Oh, false assassin lurking in thy den. He says now, he compares him to Iscariot. Who's Iscariot? Judas of Iscariot. Yeah, he compares him to Judas, Ganelon, and Sinon. These were all traitors, and he's babbling on about what a traitor he is. And then he goes, and he had been warned in his dreams. But now look at this, line 416. But that which God's foreknowledge can foresee must needs occur, as certain men of learning have said. And so here we go. 420. On this vexed matter of predestination, long bandied by 100,000 men, how can I sift through the bottom. Okay, he's talking about this question of predestination. Did the dream mean this was predestined to happen? And he's alluding to the theological argument between predestination and free will. Okay, do you know what that is? If you believe you're saved by free will, what does that mean?
Go to.
You choose to be a Christian. If you're saved by predestination, what does that mean? God chose you ahead of time. You can do anything about it. You're chosen or you're not chosen, okay? So he's saying, well, I can't solve this problem, and he blabs on about that problem. And then he goes, fate or predestination, fate or predestination, in line 435. But I decline to discuss the matter. No kidding. He gets off the subject a lot, right? He says, whoops, I get off my subject. My tale is of a rooster and the clatter that came of his wife's advice. Oh, woman's counsel is often so cold. A woman's counsel brought us to first woe, made Adam out of paradise go where he had been happy, so well at ease. But, for I know not whom it may displease if I suggest that women are to blame, I'm going to pass over that and only speak of the game, or the story that he's telling. What has been said of women, you'll find out. These are the rooster's words and not mine. I'm giving. I think no harm of any woman living. Now, there's a great debate on whether he's really trying to support women here or he's trying to put them down. So he tells this about women being man's fall and all this, and then he says at the end of it, the narrator says, but I'm only quoting the rooster. He says, personally, I think no harm of any woman living. Okay, so we can debate about that. So merrily in her dust bath in the sand lay Pert-Lit. Her sisters were basking in the sunlight. Chantecler was singing more merrily than a mermaid in the sea. Blah, 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 blah. And so as he cast his eye toward the cabbage at a butterfly, it fell upon the fox lying low. Gone was all inclination then to crow. Cock, cock, he cried, giving a sudden start, as one who feels terror in his heart. For natural instinct teaches beasts to flee the moment they perceive an enemy. Chantecler, run, right? This Chantecler was shaken to the core, and he would have fled. The fox was quick to say, however, Sir, whither so fast away? Are you afraid of me, that am your friend? A fiend or worse I should be to intend you harm, or practice villainy upon you. Dear sir, I was not even spying on you. Truly, I came to do nothing other than to hear you sing. Don't run away. I wanted to hear you sing. You have as merry a voice as God has given to any angel in the heavenly courts, and you add to music the sense. And now the fox is saying, as had Boethius, who was skilled in song. Even the fox knows about these people. My Lord, your father, God receive his soul. Your mother, too, how courtly, what control, have honored my poor house to my great ease. And you, sir, too, I shall be glad to please. He says, both your parents came to my home. And I used to listen to your father sing. And then he goes on, there never was a singer I've heard as respected as your father. All that he sang came welling from his soul. How do you think the father and mother got to the fox's house? If indeed he's telling the truth. Do you think they came over for dinner? Yeah, his dinner, right? And how he put his voice in. So he's talking about how wonderful his, and then he said, and your father would sing with his slender neck stretched out long, and the music came out of his delicate beak. And then he says, no singer could approach his technique, and he's setting him up. He's saying, stretch your neck out now. And he's talking about the Father and how wonderful he is. And then you're going to read what happens to the end. Read to the end of this story. It's only a couple pages left.